Donc nous allons continuer avec une intervention donc, de Irina Prokofieva, qui est directrice du laboratoire d'économie au Centre technique forestier catalan et qui a contribué à l'étude For Value qui a consisté à une étude sur le développement et la mise en marché des produits et services forestiers non marchands, et notamment un certain nombre de cas appliqués à la gestion de l'eau en zone méditerranéenne. Merci. Donc cette intervention est en anglais. Donc ceux qui veulent une prothèse peuvent l'utiliser.
Thank you very much. Good morning. For a challenge, I will speak in English so that you can appreciate the enormous effort that the interpreters are doing. I have to thank them for my part because I'm able to follow the presentations in French very well. So I will talk about the study that was conducted by our colleagues at EFIMED and in which I also participated. And I will also talk a little bit about the lessons that we can extract from different existing payment schemes for water-related services in the whole world. I have been working in the last years, for the last 2 or 3 years, in international programs which deal with payments for environmental services and specifically for water-related services, and we have gathered quite a nice expertise on that topic. So I hope it can be useful for you. For Value study has been commissioned by the DG Agriculture to the Mediterranean Regional Office of the European Forest Institute. And it is, the full title is the Study on the Development and Marketing of Non-Market Forest Products and Services. And it has been prepared by a collaboration of different institutes, European Forest Institute, University of Natural Resources and Applied Life Sciences in Vienna, by Alterra, with the participation of Confederation of European Forest Owners, and with the participation of some external experts, among which I had the honor to be invited. And if you are interested, the full report is available at the webpage of the European Commission. And here is the address, the link. So the main objective of this study was to acquire summarized information on the state of the art in the field of valuation and compensation for non-market forest goods and services in the EU countries, in the 27 EU countries. Specific objectives were to identify non-market forest goods and services in the EU countries and to identify their importance for both for the politicians and at the level of the society, at the level of general public, to produce an overview of estimated values by compiling a database of valuation studies of non-market forest goods and services, provide an overview of mechanisms compensating for the provision of non-market forest goods and services, and finally review alternatives for applying such mechanisms. We used surveys, we used literature overviews, and we also made questionnaires that were addressed to the policymakers, to different ministries, to different key stakeholders, to gather information on the existing mechanisms for for forest goods and services. One of the outputs of this project was a case database, that is the database of innovation cases in forestry, including different non-wood forest products and different financing mechanisms. This database is available also on the internet. Here is the link, and it is publicly accessible. There is no necessity to pay for it. And it provides information on the type of innovation, on the type of financing instruments, on the type of forest goods and services addressed, and also more detailed information on the country, on the implementation mechanism itself. So you can search through it to find cases if you are interested in the existing mechanisms in forestry. For Value project, one of the outcomes also showed the importance of water services or water-related services at all the levels. So we can see here the importance of water purification and the importance of water regulation. It was these water-related services were considered important or very important in most parts of the EU. However, at the time when we implemented, at the time when the For-Value study was implemented, we managed to find only 2 cases of water-related payment mechanisms, and perhaps for you, not surprisingly, both cases come from France. So in order to derive more general conclusions, I will talk to you about some other payment schemes for water-related services. In general, when we talk about payment schemes, we can identify two types of groups of payment schemes. The ones addressing demand for water, these ones provide incentives to influence water use or to avoid water overuse, for example, in countries in which water scarcity is a problem. And here we can talk about tradable water rights that, for example, exist in Australia. And another group of payment schemes, they address the supply of water, the topics on which we have been talking also yesterday. So they provide incentives to upstream land users to influence water quality and quantity. And here we have the traditional payments for watershed services and also water quality trading that takes place in several countries, namely in USA, Australia, and Canada. As I said, payments for watershed services, they provide financial or in-kind incentives to land managers or to land stewards to adopt practices that can be linked to improvements of valuable watershed services. And in this respect, we talk about the payments can be both cash payments, they can be in-kind compensations, then they can be done through land purchase, or through financing of protection activities, and also they can, in some cases, provide technical assistance, education, and can be oriented at integrated watershed management planning. We can identify 2 main drivers for the introduction of payments for water services. We can identify demand-driven schemes. They search after the identification of a problem downstream, that is a problem either with water flow or water quality, and this problem is perceived to be related to land management practices upstream. In such situations, payments, they act as incentives to landowners to change land-based practices. And then there is another group of drivers that are the supply-driven schemes, and in these schemes, they search from the identification of threats to a protected area or to natural ecosystems upstreams, or when land and resource management is considered unsustainable. So in this case, payments from water users are considered as possible sources of funds for the improvement of watershed practices. Who participates in these schemes? Well, on the side of the buyers, the ones who make payments, we can identify municipal water supply systems, irrigation systems, drinking water companies, hydroelectric power generators, other industries, and even in some cases populations in flood-prone areas. And among all these buyers, the ones that have the most direct and the most close links are the ones that are able to provide, let's say, more sustainable financing for such schemes. And then the receivers of these payments are naturally the upstream landowners, either private landowners, communal landowners, or public managers, or also in some cases informal stewards of the land, as long as they have the control over the actions that they can take on the land. We can also differentiate payments for watershed services according to the degree of governmental intervention. And in this situation, we can identify 3 types of schemes. We can identify private schemes in which little or no government intervention is necessary. We can identify trading schemes in which government sets the rules and puts the frame for the operation. And then we can identify public schemes which are quite intensive in terms of government intervention. And I will briefly talk about the 3 schemes, give some examples, and also highlight some lessons that we have learned from the overview of studies that we've done. So private schemes usually emerge as an alternative when watershed management is considered as an alternative to a usually more costly traditional water treatment, or in situations where private interests need water quality or water flow that goes beyond the regulatory standards. Also, they emerge in countries or in situations where there is no effective regulatory system in place. Financing for these private schemes comes from private sources, obviously, through user fees, transfer payments, land purchase, cost-sharing agreements, for example. And the most well-known example, perhaps, is the Perrier-Vittel's case of payments for water quality to agricultural landowners. And there is also a case in Colombia, in Cauca Valley, Association of Irrigators Payments. In Colombia, they have voluntary payments. They make voluntary payments by associations of irrigators and government agencies to private upstream landowners. So they finance watershed management practices, and this is the supply-driven scheme in upland areas. And these management practices are supposed to improve base flows and reduce sedimentation of irrigation canals. So the practices include reforestation, erosion control, land purchases, and also economic development of in upland communities. Just as an illustration, the association members, they pay a voluntary water use fee of approximately $2 per liter on top of usual existing water access fee that is $0.5 per liter of water. Some remarks on these schemes, on the private schemes. Usually they do not require regulatory reform as such. However, we have to bear in mind that these schemes, the contracts are based on intensive and usually long-lasting negotiations. Just think about the Vittel's case. Participatory process must be started quite early to negotiate actions and payments, and all the relevant stakeholders must be addressed in these early stages in order to guarantee success. Public sector institutions, the involvement of public sector institutions, water bodies, research institutions, it's usually an advantage as a supporter. These payments, they are likely to occur and they are likely to emerge by themselves in situations when the water services provided are private goods, for example, drinking water, or when the water is needed for electricity production. And they are, of course, naturally, they are limited to the particular watersheds upstream. And in situations when there is a strong link between land use actions and watershed services, and when this strong link can be actually demonstrated. Such schemes, private schemes, they take place only if monitoring and transaction costs can be covered by the price that is paid by the users, or at least it can be subsidized. Now, when we go to trading schemes, we find them in countries with stronger environmental regulations. So in these situations, government sets a water standard or a cap on the total pollution emission, and it is not that important who actually makes the actions as long as the standard is met, and emission credits are earned based on the production of emissions lower than the standard level. So the financing sources the financing comes from companies or landowners that buy credits because for them it's cheaper to buy credits than to abate pollution by themselves. And usually we see these situations in cases when we have point polluters that are usually regulated and non-point polluters like agriculture that is usually not regulated. So the trade is usually cross-sectoral here. And credits can be created via a range of land-based best management practices, for example, changing agricultural practices or planting forests on the banks, on the river's banks, etc. And here we have the different nutrient trading programs that exist in the United States or water salinity credits that exist in Australia. Some remarks on these. These schemes, trading schemes, operate at the watershed level, and therefore they are usually quite fragmented. So there is no consolidated market established in this area. Authority for trading scheme lies with regulatory public regulatory agencies, either at the state level, federal level, or local level, and these agencies are the ones that set the rules and put forward such trading schemes. For adequate functioning, these schemes require adequate regulation because it is the one that creates demand for the credits, and what is more importantly, effective monitoring. And of course, it requires usually significant upfront investment of resources for developing such a scheme. As a result, what we obtain, what we have seen from different studies is that usually it's possible to obtain to reduce pollution, water pollution, by more cost-efficient methods, and also in some cases it's possible to reach standards that are much better than the ones that are set by the regulatory bodies. And then finally, the public schemes. Public schemes are the schemes in which government or a public sector institution pays for watershed services. So the income comes from different sources, from general tax revenues, from bond issues, user fees, etc. And the most prominent example is perhaps the New York City Watershed Management Program of Catskill Watershed, or different forestry funds, and for example, Mexican Forest Fund is one of the examples. Some remarks on this. Usually these type of programs, they also require intensive negotiations between the governments located in downstream zones and in upstream zones of the watershed, and usually they require significant changes in the regulatory environment. And since most water-related ecosystem services are public goods, it's expected that these public schemes, they will remain the most common financial arrangements in the future. For example, the for value, what has demonstrated is that the taxes and subsidies are the most common instruments used to finance the provision of forest goods and services in the EU member states. By far the most common. So just to conclude, for water-related payments, demand is usually the main driver of watershed markets. And intermediary-based transactions are the most common ones, and they are used as a way of pooling demand and also for risk sharing and fundraising. Most of water-related payments, they operate as local markets at the level of the watershed. And of course, we may run into problems when watersheds cross political boundaries, because there are different problems that can emerge in such situations. Benefits are also highly variable from one watershed to the next one. We have seen that yesterday a little bit the costs and the values, the figures that have been shown. So we cannot necessarily translate the same figures from one watershed to the next one. And the opportunities for watershed protection payments may be limited due to several factors. For example, in remote or very large or very sparsely populated watersheds, or in countries with poorly defined or ineffective legal and regulatory frameworks, or also in the situations when there is simply lack of information about the source of the ecosystem service and who exactly benefits from it, because these are the important components of the payment scheme. General conclusions that have been drawn in the For Value study. We have identified that a strong engagement of landowners, land managers, interest groups, and extension services is a requisite, an important requisite for an increased development and marketing of forest goods and services. And the engagement of political and institutional level actors is also required in order to develop public and private mechanisms. So not only public and public-private mechanisms should be further developed, but also innovation support should be given to landowners who invent or who come up with new innovative ideas to finance forest goods and services. And For Value identified three types of actions which were proposed. First of all, cross-border exchange of information and experience. A lot of payments are emerging in the last years, and after the completion of For Value project, we have identified several schemes also at the European level. Now they are emerging, and it's good to learn from them. It's good to get information from them and learn from the mistakes, and learn also which are the good triggers, which are the good qualities in these mechanisms. Support for cross-sectoral cooperation is also important, because when we talk about water, we talk about different sectors usually, and it's also important to provide seed money for the development of new market opportunities, and to improve awareness also on existing policy instruments or existing policy measures for innovation support, for example, under the Rural Development Program. And finally, to finalize the slide, which are the key success factors that we have identified for the payments for watershed services? Effective local participation is important, is crucial to involve all the stakeholders, and it is crucial to involve the stakeholders as early as possible in order to identify clear actions to be taken and to be able to negotiate on the payments that should be made. Organizational structure and monitoring, the administrative capacity should be sufficient to be able to deal with such schemes. Proper external support from public sector also is important. Security about land tenure is a key factor. We cannot go without it. And also favorable legal framework and public policies. We have heard yesterday about the legal possible legal impediments that can exist in order to implement the payment schemes. And also a very important factor is a favorable political context. Of course, we cannot go if there is no political support for that. Thank you very much for your attention. Other sectors that are non-regulated. So for example, agricultural producers or forest owners, they are usually not regulated. So they can, by planting forest or managing forest in an adequate way, they can improve water quality. And companies, the regulated companies are the ones that, through the purchase of credits, can finance these activities.
Merci, je vous remercie de votre présentation. J'aimerais revenir sur certains points de votre présentation en complément. D'abord, il faut une volonté politique pour mettre sur pied des paiements de services écosystémiques. On n'en a peut-être pas parlé hier, mais c'est très important. C'est là que l'information, la communication est très importante sur les valeurs des services. Et là, on parlait de la forêt spécialement hier. Ça, c'est très important. Ce n'est pas seulement pour le niveau politique, mais le niveau du consommateur. Parce que le consommateur, les exemples que je vous ai donnés hier à propos du Japon sont des exemples qui ont été discutés avec les consommateurs. La ville de New York a pu mettre un système sur pied de mesures de gestion du territoire seulement lorsqu'ils ont donné le choix aux consommateurs de New York, soit faire une usine de filtration qui coûtait des milliards, ou utiliser un programme de mesures précis qui coûtait beaucoup moins cher. Donc ça, c'est très important. Je dirais que si on va dans un bassin versant, commencer à introduire des services de paiement, enfin un système de paiement de services écosystémiques, il faut effectivement contacter tous les acteurs. Maintenant, il y a un moment donné dans vos dias, vous dites qu'il n'y a pas besoin de réforme de réglementation, et après vous dites qu'il faut des lois, etc. Alors j'aimerais juste faire une petite parenthèse. Quand on regarde les exemples qui ont été faits en Amérique du Sud, il n'y a en général pas beaucoup de lois, il y a peu de bases légales, à part peut-être au Costa Rica, etc. Mais en Europe et dans la pan-Europe, et ça c'est une des constatations que j'ai faites, spécialement avec des pays de l'Est ou d'Asie centrale, pour eux, la législation est extrêmement importante. S'il n'y a pas quelque chose d'écrit dans un texte, il est très difficile pour eux de pouvoir démarrer ce genre de système. Donc c'est quelque chose, il y a une différence au niveau... nous sommes très légalistes en Europe et dans la pan-Europe, et beaucoup plus que dans d'autres pays en développement, puisque bon, on considère l'Asie centrale comme quand même une zone de pays en développement. Et alors, il y a une chose, vous indiquez ce qu'on appelle seed money en anglais. Je ne sais pas comment on traduit en français, d'ailleurs. Peut-être que des traductrices pourraient me le donner. Là, je ne sais pas comment ça se dit. Quand on donne un petit peu d'argent pour démarrer un projet, c'est bien. Ça peut être fait par un gouvernement, ça peut être fait par une organisation non gouvernementale. Mais ce qu'il faut savoir, c'est qu'un système de paiement de services écosystémiques doit être durable de lui-même. C'est-à-dire qu'au moment où on le bâtit, c'est quelque chose qui doit pouvoir fonctionner, si possible sans l'aide de l'État. Enfin, j'entends, c'est quelque chose qu'on ne doit pas subventionner pour que ça marche. Donc ça, c'est quelque chose d'important. Et puis peut-être encore une autre parenthèse, ce qu'on appelle les trading schemes, ce qu'on voit aux États-Unis, c'est qu'en Europe, on va plutôt vers une prévention plutôt que des permis à émettre. Alors, dans certains endroits, ça s'est fait. Je sais que dans la mer Baltique, il y a eu une tentation de le faire. Mais en général, la philosophie européenne est plutôt de gérer des émissions à la source plutôt que de devoir gérer des permis à polluer, en fait. Et ça, c'est bien une philosophie très différente avec d'autres schémas. Et ce qui revient à dire ce que je disais hier peut-être aussi, c'est que nous avons besoin de beaucoup plus d'exemples en Europe, puisqu'on ne peut pas faire des copier-coller sur des exemples qui ont été faits soit dans des pays en développement, ou soit dans des pays en dehors de l'Europe, parce qu'il y a des conditions très différentes. Il y a une philosophie aussi de la prévention, qui est quand même quelque chose sur lequel on doit tabler. Et j'ai indiqué dans les feuilles donc certaines références, et je pense que non seulement il y a l'importance des lois en Europe qui est importante, mais nous avons des engagements internationaux. Et je pense que quand à l'avenir vous allez construire des systèmes de paiement de services écosystémiques, ce sera important de regarder les obligations internationales et de vous appuyer là-dessus. Les engagements de Nagoya qui ont été pris il y a 2 semaines de ça sont une base, et puis il y a la directive cadre dans l'article 9 et 11 qui donne des bases légales donc pour ce genre de choses. Donc pas oublier qu'on a des éléments, on a des outils dans les mains au niveau européen qui sont là et qu'il ne faut pas oublier. Merci.
Thank you. Yes, I cannot but agree with you. I think it is important to, all the things that you have mentioned, they are very important. We cannot just make a copy-paste from other cases. We have to adapt the situations to our needs, to our particular needs. The differences in not only in the legal situations, but also in the cultural background and our socioeconomic situation of our countries is completely different. So we cannot just translate the examples that are coming from other parts of the world just by copy-pasting them into our context. And also we should not, I would be a little bit cautious about the whole system of payments for ecosystem services, because we should not consider them as the panacea for solving our problems. So they are just one of the solutions, and as you say, the funding should be sustainable and the functioning of these schemes should be sustainable, and it is very difficult actually to make sure that these are sustainable in time. So we can, as you said, you cannot just be inserting public money in these schemes all the time. So yes, I fully support your intervention. Thank you.
Julien Fiquepron, Institut pour le développement forestier. J'avais une question sur le second site qui avait été présenté pour les paiements des services environnementaux en France pour l'eau, le site de Vittel. Parce qu'en fait, c'est assez, le paiement des services environnementaux envers les agriculteurs sur le site de Vittel est bien connu et est assez évident. Par contre, en ce qui concerne les forestiers, ça nous paraît beaucoup moins évident. Est-ce que vous avez des précisions à ce sujet-là?
I think, sorry. I think this is a scheme that was mainly developed perhaps for foresters. So for the Vittel case, I don't have any additional information that I could provide. But for example, in Catalonia, we have several cases in which water companies are making contracts with private forest owners, and there are payments to sustain the resources. However, for example, in Catalonia, there is hardly any information on these schemes because neither water companies nor the forest owners are willing to speak about these things due to questions of competing interests and that someone else will find out and they will copy these things. So we have been for several months, I would say, knocking on the doors of different people to try to find what is the situation, and it's difficult. There is a lot of secretism about this.
Oui, Louis-Michel Duhain, du Centre régional de la propriété forestière de Provence-Côte d'Azur. Votre étude, elle date de 2008 et j'ai constaté autour de moi qu'elle était très peu connue, même de la part, par exemple, d'universitaires. Comment faire, comment vous expliquez ça? Enfin, c'est peut-être pas vous qui avez la réponse, mais comment faire pour que des études d'un tel intérêt soient mieux connues?
Well, actually, there has been quite a lot of interest to the topic of payments for watershed services. For example, the IUCN has been working on it, and I know that the Ecosystem Marketplace has recently published a document that is called the State of Watersheds, and they look at all the different programs that exist in the whole world. So there are a lot of things that are appearing. And maybe prior to 2007, there have been not so much information yet, because most of the schemes, at least in Europe, they are, with the exception perhaps of the Vittel case, they are not very old, let's say. So they need time to operate and before we actually can look at it. And I think also one of the reasons was just that the whole attention in the, let's say, last decades, it has been more on the valuation of ecosystem services and not so much putting into practice these values. And I think now we have reached, or let's say that some 5 or 7 years ago, we have reached a point in which we understand that, okay, these values just by themselves, they are not, they don't serve us unless we actually implement them and put them in practice by implementing different policies. So I think this is just a shift in the tendency.